And I remind you that after this event, at 8 p.m. we will have a dinner. And it will be served at the restaurant on the second floor of our hotel. But before that, please be patient. And I want to inform you that tomorrow, the last day of our conference, and the first panel of this day will start at 9 a.m. So, dear participants, maybe it's a good idea to sit a little bit closer to the scene, because there is a lot of places which were reserved for our special guests and they are left now. So this is free places. If you want, please come closer. So I think we are ready. Few moments more. And again, dear participants, if you can, if you wish, you can sit closer to the stage. There is no need to sit far away, but it's up to you.
Здається, ні. Я не буду тут сидіти, я буду сидіти назад.
Ми можемо приставати до сцени, але це буде ще гірше.
Людей на сцені не було більше, ніж в залі, ну нічого. Дмитро із залу буде, я якось його, якщо вийде по часу, запрошу. Окей. Wow.
Are ready, so we are ready to start. One more time, documenting international crimes by civil society and media. I give the floor to moderator of this discussion, Roman Romanov, human rights.
Окей, дуже дякую.
I hope my mic is working. And so I hope it will enable us to have this conversation. I am so happy to see all of these people present here who respect the Ukrainian civil society, despite the fact that it is late today and despite that we have had a very busy day on the agenda. I'm very happy that you have stayed here to discuss the role of the Ukrainian civil society. And what you're seeing in front of you, this is just a small part of the people representing organizations and efforts that are being made today to ensure justice for the victims of these horrible crimes, to make sure that the justice is not abstract, to make sure that new strategies are developed, that facts and instances are recorded, and to make sure that the Ukrainian society represented by the activists does not stand aside and does not rely solely on the work of the state institutions. One of the major differences that might have pushed Putin partially towards this act of aggression is probably that in Ukraine, we have never ignored injustice. Ukrainian civil society was always there on the forefront of responding to any types of injustice. And so I believe that for regimes like the one that is built in Russia, this poses an immense threat. After the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, hundreds and thousands of Ukrainians started to try to help the victims of these crimes, collected information. A lot of organizations who have never dealt with documenting war crimes have started to do so. Beside human rights organizations that have been working with us quite closely since 2014 or even since Maidan, since 2013, this process was joined by different organizations that were working on environmental issues, media issues from all across the board. And so we have established this very extensive front of activity of Ukrainian NGOs. And I'm very happy that within the framework of this conference, we have this opportunity to discuss this crucial role that Ukrainian civil society organizations play in this process. Today we have 4 blocks of questions that I would like to cover with our panel participants, and I hope that we will be able to hear more about the facts, about what the civil society organizations see while they're documenting these crimes, while they're assisting the victims and the survivors. How does this work take place on behalf of the civil society organizations? What do they pay attention to? What are the obstacles and the roadblocks? And how do these cooperation networks grow today? Which shapes and forms they take and why are they important? And also which legal strategies can be applied in order to ensure that all of these amounts of information, this data, does not remain in the archives of the organizations alone. And so I really hope that the time slot that is allocated to us will still allow us to hear the responses and stories from the organizations, and will also help us engage the audience, where we do have a lot of activists present who are doing incredibly important work to help the victims of these crimes. I would like to first and foremost give the floor to the representatives of the Human Rights Center, Zmina, Tatiana Pechonchik. Your organization has been working extensively on documenting war crimes, so which facts are you documenting? What is happening from the framework of your organization's functions? How does it match the topics that have been discussed during this conference? And I would really ask you to be as concise and as succinct as possible. I would like you to give your answer in 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you, Roman. Our organization, the Human Rights Center, Zmina, documents violations of human rights, war crimes since 2013. starting with the occupation of Crimea, and after February 24th, this work has grown extensively, and we're doing that as a part of the coalition Ukraine 5 AM that actually includes 31 civil society organizations, and this coordination is crucial. Our organization documents war crimes in various types, such as preserving and verifying data from open sources according to Berkeley Protocol, interviewing victims and witnesses, and also conducting site visits, field missions. We're documenting all types of war crimes, including crimes against humanity. And we also have a separate mission dedicated to the forced deportations and torture documentation. And this is something that has been discussed today during the conference, and I would like to mention this again. The scale is insane. The Office of the Prosecutor General has registered more than 70,000 criminal proceedings on Article 438, violation of rules and traditions of warfare, and we know that this number will only keep growing because the war is still going on every day. The prosecutors register 100 to 200 criminal proceedings. That's first and foremost. And secondly, when the other territories of Ukraine will be deoccupied, we will definitely uncover more and more facts that are currently unknown to the law enforcement system. And third of all, there are also crimes that are covert, the crimes that go underreported, and those are the sexual violence related crimes. We currently are aware of 156 facts of sexual violence, of rapes, that the criminal proceedings have been launched for, and yet another covert crime is deportation that our organization is working with. We are currently aware of the 90 criminal proceedings on the instances of deportation of children. However, it is obvious that the potential victims of these crimes can be hundreds of thousands, even millions of people. We do not know because we cannot estimate the exact numbers. Bina was able to document 233 instances of deportation. We have conducted field missions both abroad. We have recently worked in Latvia and Estonia, and we're also working here in Ukraine in border-adjacent villages of Kharkiv Oblast, where people were deported from and they have returned back home afterwards. And talking to people, we have realize that almost none of them have addressed the law enforcement agencies, the police. There are multiple reasons for that. If we're speaking specifically about deportation, quite often people do not understand that the crime has been committed against them, because very often deportation is done under the guise of evacuation, and people are just happy to be alive, and they're concentrated on surviving and on tackling the challenges in front of them rather than thinking about addressing the police and making claims. Some of them are afraid because they still have families living in temporary occupied territories, they have property, and they're afraid of retributions. There are some people who are currently on the territory of the Russian Federation or on the territory of the third-party countries, and even though the Office of the Prosecutor General continues to try to raise awareness of how you can report these crimes, even if you're not on the territory of Ukraine, very few people know of those tools and those mechanisms. And there's still a part of people that do not trust courts, police, prosecutors' office in general as such, and they're not ready to report these crimes. This is just a small example, but if we go back to different types of crimes that have been committed during the Russian armed aggression, we also understand that a significant percentage of those crimes, more than 99%, will be investigated through national mechanisms by Ukrainian law enforcement bodies, by Ukrainian investigators, Ukrainian prosecutors' offices, Ukrainian courts. And it's very important to talk about capability here, about the capability of our system of working with such a scale of crimes and such an amount of crimes. If we take a look at the crimes that were committed 9 years ago during the Euromaidan, approximately 4,000 crimes were committed then. And 9 years later, we know about 26 court rulings, and 120 cases are still in courts. It has been 9 years. And of course, the scale of those crimes was much smaller. And so the conclusion we can draw as a civil society and as a state, that it will take decades and decades, and we have to plan our work considering that this is a very, very long-term journey. maybe we'll reach our retirement, and we have to be ready. This will be the duty of our generation to document and collect the evidence of these crimes and do that in such a manner that in 50 years, when military war criminals will be identified, we will be able to bring them to justice. Thank you so much, Tatiana. And we have Ms. Oksana Romanyuk here with us, who represents the Mass Information Studios. And as an organization, they have done a lot to protect the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression in Ukraine. They have close cooperation with different Ukrainian mass media. And there was a lot of information, many reports saying that Ukrainian journalists were one of the targets during the occupation of certain territories. And so the Studio of Mass Information has also joined the collection of data. They have worked through all of their networks, all of their contacts, and so I think it will be very interesting to hear from Ms. Oksana what they are aware of. What does the situation look like? How do Ukrainian journalists feel under the conditions of this aggression? What does the information domain looks like, and what are the damages in that area? Thank you. Mr. Romanov, Russia has tried to clear the information domain everywhere. On all occupied territories, as soon as the Russian forces advanced, after a couple of hours, they were there in the offices of local media. They were threatening journalists with AK rifles. They were demanding to receive, to pass on propaganda about Putin, Победа, victory, etc. If the journalists refused those requests, they would be taken hostage. Their families would be taken hostage. We are aware of instances when journalists were specifically targeted with a UAV, with an attack UAV, when journalists would be purposefully shelled and targeted. All of these horrendous attacks against journalists prove that Russia is a dictatorship that is afraid of information, that is afraid of freedom of speech. Starting from February 24th, we were able to document more than 500 crimes against media and journalists. 48 our colleagues, journalists, have been murdered by the Russians. More than 230 Ukrainian media were forced to shut down. And their offices were either seized on the occupied territories or they were completely destroyed. Many journalists have become the forced internally displaced individuals and refugees. And this year, our mission, if previously it had something to do with development of values of high-quality journalism and analytics, this year for us has become the year of saving Ukrainian journalism because Russia launched an attack on Ukrainian journalism. Yet another important aspect, when we're talking about Russia's attack on the information domain, I want us to also mention the liability of Russian propagandists, their criminal liability. Unfortunately, over the course of many years, we have utilized the wrong term. We have used the term disinformation when we were talking about Russian propaganda, forgetting that this is in fact the worst form of the hate speech. Over the course of this year, we have seen that Russian propaganda has become extremely aggressive. Those were specific incitements to genocide, to destruction, to bombardment of civilian facilities, residential areas, infrastructure, incitements to murder of Ukrainians, and all of that can be traced all the way to Putin's doctrines, to their military doctrine, to claims by the Russian political military leadership who stated that there are no such people as Ukrainians. And so we have faced this challenge related to innovation. Because this crime that we want to describe right now, that we want to document, that we are documenting, is related to aggressive Russian propaganda. But it is not reflected in the international legislation yet. Our goal is to obtain justice. and to make sure that this crime is never repeated ever again, never in the world, to make sure that no dictator can indoctrinate his people so much that they take up weapons and kill other peoples, for them to believe that other peoples are somehow less than. I do not see a reflection of that in the international legislation. I know that this is a crime against humanity. I know this is a crime of aggression, but the information component of this crime is not described anywhere. So we are facing this challenge to describe this crime properly and to make sure that these propagandists are held accountable on the international level as well. And here there is also another issue. We believe that the crimes related to information have to be separated into a separate category. They have to, those proceedings have to be separated, and the attention of Ukrainian law enforcement has to be paid to those as well. We're currently cooperating with Ukrainian law enforcement on this issue. But when it comes to documenting crimes such as mass murders, taking journalists hostage, we understand what it looks like on the national level, on the international level. Then when we're talking about aggressive propaganda, it is a challenge. And I really hope, and I call upon all of you to stop using the term disinformation when we're talking about Russian propaganda. It is one of the mechanisms, one of the small tools we all have to counter them, because this is what they use to commit this crime of aggression in the information domain. There are quite a few challenges ahead of us, so I'm not going to take any more of your time. Thank you, Oksana, for your speech. And there's an extremely interesting but a very underdeveloped topic in the international law of crimes against the environment. And under the conditions of this aggression against Ukraine, it is very difficult to even estimate what type of damage is done to the environment. There is a range of proceedings that qualify certain acts as ecocide. And it is very important that Ukrainian environmental organizations join this effort in documenting the crimes that are committed during this war of Russian Federation against Ukraine. We currently have with us the representative of the environmental organization Environment, the Right of a Human, Ms. Solovia Baran, and I ask you, Ms. Solomia, what does your movement do? What does your organization do? What do you see? And why is that important? What types of challenges you are facing in terms of environmental protection and crimes that are committed against it? First and foremost, I would like to thank all of you for the invitation, for the ability to speak here to you and share my experience of thoughts. I know that during this conference there will be yet another discussion dedicated to crimes against the environment. That is why I will allow myself to move on to the issues that we face almost every day. So first and foremost, talking about legislation, talking about the legal aspect. Almost every crime dedicated to harm to the environment on both national and international level has evaluative terms. Even the Rome Statute uses the term causing serious and long-term and widespread harm. Our criminal code also uses a lot of qualitative terms such as mass harm. And so there is not a unified position yet on how we have to interpret these terms. Widespread harm to the environment. There are certain scientists who believe that this category has to be measured by area, and they say that it's more than 100,000 square meters of damaged territories. Other scientists believe that this term has to rely, the widespread harm to the environment has to rely on the measurement of 44,000 square meters. We're talking about different areas and different qualifications. There's also a difference of opinions in terms of other qualitative terms. And as a result, we do not understand what the quantitative measurements are. How do we apply these terms? And as a result, there is no case law. And in our case, in the Ukrainian case, there is no case law of international institutions utilizing this legislation. What does it mean? It means that we have to start discussing this today. This has to be the discussion to make decisions, to create ideas that will allow us to not only understand the components of the crimes committed today and will not only allow us to hold the perpetrators liable, the perpetrators of crimes committed during this war, but also to define the elements of the crimes that will enable us to defend the environment and protect the environment even in peacetime, because even for the peacetime we do not have clear understanding of these terms and these notions. And the second aspect that I would like to highlight is that it's very difficult to talk about holding the perpetrators accountable without collecting evidence. Our team is also collecting data, collecting evidence. And what do we face? First and foremost, we don't always have access to territories. It is very important to understand that crimes committed against the environment will be mostly proven in court with the results of expertise. In order to commit an expertise, you have to take samples from the field. So whenever our experts go to the field, to the occupied territories even, quite often we face the fact that you can only move along the concrete roads. But the missiles don't choose the sites where they strike based on the road maps. Quite often we do have to go in depths of the forest to take samples, what our experts are unable to do because it is not safe due to the territories being mined.
Even if we take samples and we have all the indicators, we face the following issue. The Ukrainian labs practically are not equipped with the necessary reagents, and the number of expertise and examinations that can be done here is limited. Our organization has sent some samples to some burn labs and institutions, and in order to understand what is going on, it's not enough. We do need international cooperation and development of R&D institutions available in Ukraine, even if we have the expertise and examination results. We all know that the Russians use different type of missiles that contain different type of chemicals. And for us to be able to come to certain conclusions, we need lots of different experts in order to interpret the results of these expertise and examinations. This is also an issue. So the majority of the issues we are talking about may be addressed by means of cooperation. United for Justice may also mean united by the environment, because only owing to cooperation between the public authorities, the citizens and our foreign partners will be able to produce evidence that will enable us to hold people accountable, not only for the crimes that have already been mentioned, crimes committed against people, but also for the crimes against environment. Thank you very much, Solomia, for your presentation, for stressing the importance of cooperation. And we are going to discuss all these issues during our next block, because we understand that this spectrum of issues we are facing today, it is impossible to address this spectrum without cooperation, and we are becoming more and more aware of it. And now I would like us to discuss how this documenting is taking place. So we do not only discuss what is documented, but also how we are doing it. We have already mentioned that there are some restrictions in order to avoid a re-traumatization of victims. What is the role of the civil society in the process? It seems to me we all have to understand whether these restrictions and the role of civil society is understandable to these civil society organizations who are very active in providing assistance to the victims and in documenting international crimes. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Olha Skripnik, who represents the Crimean Human Rights Group. This is the organization that practically has not faced any changes in 2022 because you have been targeting the issues of human rights violations and war crimes investigation in the territory of the Crimea, which was occupied in 2014. And probably you have already have quite extensive experience what kind of tactics, methodologies and practices are good and how the organizations should act in order to follow no harm principle and in order to achieve success on the way to justice. Olga, you have the floor. Thank you, Romana. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for staying with us till the end. And I would like to express our gratitude to the state sector, to the representative of civil society, to all our partners who are doing their best to see justice in effect. And this justice is necessary to the victims of crimes, to people who were the victims of crimes of the Russian Federation since 2014. We have built the monitoring network in 2014. We are from the Crimea. We are the human rights advocates and the journalists who got united from the beginning of the very aggression and occupation. We started with just documenting what was going on in Ukrainian military units, how they were occupied by the Russians in 2014, and later we proceeded with documenting crimes against civilians. On the 3rd of March 2014, there was the first victim of the Russian aggression among the civilians, and it was Rishad Ahmedov, who was abducted, who was tortured and killed. This is the Crimean Tatar who had a protest against the occupation. And since that day, there were lots of other forced disappearances. And now we have this practice applied in the other territories which are occupied. Really, for us, nothing has changed. The scale of this crime has changed. Now this crime is committed all over Ukraine, and there are thousands of victims. Another step taken by the Russian Federation is the politically motivated trials. This is the case of Oleg Sentsov, who is now defending us in the front line, and this was the second stage of the process. Oksana has already mentioned today the prosecution of journalists. The journalists were one of the key targets of political persecution. And we concentrated our attention on documenting these crimes. I'm talking about abduction of people and the other crimes. The key point is working on the ground. And this is invaluable experience, and this is the key point, to work in the field, to work on the ground, to work with people. The second issue is cooperation on all the levels. The political process that we monitor in the Crimea. In this respect, the work of the lawyers is of great importance. It was important in 2013, it is important now. And unfortunately, it has been always restricted by the Russian Federation since 2014. And after the full-scale invasion, we have seen the direct attacks on the lawyers in the Crimea. Some Crimean lawyers have been arrested. I'm talking about the lawyers involved in the defense of political prisoners. And now Russia is trying to restrict access to these people. We face a new challenge. This is abduction of people in the newly occupied territories, particularly in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. The practice is that Lots of these people, after being abducted, were tortured in the newly occupied territories. Later, they were transferred to Simferopol, to the Crimea. Moreover, the Russian Federation opened a new detention facility. There was the old one. Now we have detention facility number 2 in Simferopol, and it was specifically established for people who were brought from the newly occupied territories. It was a new challenge for us to find these people, to verify the information, to find their relatives. And again, effective work can be ensured only with the help of cooperation. So there are lots of colleagues who are working together, and we are trying to make this list. The first stage is collection of evidence and verification of evidence. We find these people in this detention facility, but now it is getting more and more complicated because Russia does not even initiate criminal case against these people, and the chances to find these people are even more diminished. Some of them are not recognized as being detained. We know that at least 110 people are in this detention facility, but lots of them are civilians and are not recognized as detained people by Russia. These are volunteers, these are people who were participating in pro-Ukrainian rallies. Among them, there are human rights activists and journalists. Some colleagues of mine will tell about other aspects of our activities, but I would like to say that within the context of United for Justice, we may talk about the fact how difficult it is to find people detained. So one of the challenges for us is to find the mechanism to bring these people back. And it is very important to cooperate on all the levels. So we really need cooperation at the national level between different layers of society, the civil society and the local authorities. We need these lists of people who are in prison now, who are in the Crimea, who are in the Russian Federation. We need the list of people to bring them back home. But so far, we lack these effective mechanisms, first of all, because of the actions of the Russian Federation. We also need cooperation with our international partners, human rights organizations from abroad, and we need cooperation between the states in order to find the mechanisms to bring back home those civilians who were abducted, who were transferred to the occupied territories or to the Russian Federation. And this is everything I wanted to say, and I would like to give time to my colleagues. Thank you, Olha, for your comments. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dmytro Gladkov. You have experience of using certain technical means, so please tell us what makes this work a bit easier, how technologies may become valuable in this respect, so how we can use the modern technologies. Yesterday, the Office of the General Prosecutor of Ukraine has called this conference the Judicial Rammstein, and using technology may be equaled to using highly precise, highly accurate weapon. I'm talking about the application for the smartphone that can be used by anybody who has become a witness of this or that war crime. The advantage of this application in comparison with the other ones is that this application is using technology that is making photo and video such that cannot be distorted, establishes accurate coordinate of this material, and is doing timekeeping. And also it means that we can establish the place and time, particularly under conditions of occupation. If you're doing it yourself, it presupposes certain risk. But any moment a person is using the phone, a person may use this application. And the technology is ensured by the International Bar Association, and the processing of information is ensured by the Information LexisNexis, and the information is preserved in its servers. And as a practicing lawyer, I like very much that it meets, from the legal point of view, our national legislation and the foreign legislation. And this application is used not only in Ukraine, but also beyond the boundaries of Ukraine, where it is necessary. This is the technology that is used not only there, but also in some other areas. This is reliable technology. And what is also important, the usage is very logical. Just let's imagine the situation that the lawyers of the criminals are trying to disprove, for example, these photo and video materials, and they won't be successful because there will be the logical answer provided, both from the legal and technical point of view. And coming back to the first day of our conference, we saw the introductory video, and we saw that lots of images were taken by people. So there were lots of videos made by the witnesses who were direct witnesses or even participants of those atrocities we saw on the very first day of the conference. And the technology I'm talking about makes life easier for the journalists, for the law enforcement authorities. I'm talking about the issue of verification of materials, because together with photo and video, you may provide the documents supporting the authenticity of this material. And we are talking about the issue of truth, and we should equip justice with truth. And every person who is in Ukraine will be able to do his or her contribution to the truth. Thank you for your presentation. Very often we hear that this war is getting more and more technological. We see high accuracy, high precise weapons, we see usage of drones, and we see the necessity to document the crimes, and we want this documentation to be based on technologies as well. And for us to be doing it consciously, we have to be ready for this. We have to understand all the risks and advantages of different technologies, the issue of data safety. Now I would like to give the floor to Anastasia Petek, who reproduces the public organization, the Ministry of Changes, and they have lots of experience of working in the area of digital security. They cooperate with the Ministry of Digital Transformation. So please share your experience. What are restrictions? What is taken into account? How can we assist the process following no harm principle?
Safety and data protection, and also about protection of digital evidence to international audience. First of all, the most important thing to prove that this or that event took place in the legal sphere is evidence. During the active phase of war, during the Russia aggression, civil society will work also with digital evidences. But just imagine that digital evidence can disappear. For example, it can disappear technically because every day when Ukrainian society open social media or read different kind of media, we read about cyber attacks, about government authority, and also civil and also cyber attacks to civil society, to civil servants. And also digital evidence can disappear legally. All of us know that digital evidence must comply with the concept of admissibility. Therefore, the evidence must be relevant, material, and also competent. My colleagues talk a lot about documenting war crimes, but I only really want to focus attention on the problems and challenges of collecting digital evidence and protecting data related to war crimes. In this context, on one hand, of course, we have some technical problems. It's some cyber also risks. We have big lack with digital skills in Ukraine. Civil society and also government sector don't know a lot about, for example, base rules or principles about online protection. It's like strong passwords, yes, and two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Because if we want to save the data, we really need to use cyber DGN, yes, and some cyber rules. From another hand, we have some legal problems and legal challenges. I maybe clarify only two legal problems. First of all, it's problem and challenges because we don't have a single procedure for determining the integrity of digital evidence. It's first point. From the another hand, we don't have a legal procedure for identifying the person who provides digital evidence and his procedural status when providing digital evidence. It's really a big problem for us now. Also, the preservation of digital evidence and its processing by representatives also from civil society and representatives of criminal justice system. It's not standardized in all area. Also, until now, we don't have standards in case of secure communication channels and data transmissions between civil society and criminal justice bodies. Because that is, no one analyzed the risks for transmission of digital evidence through the messengers. Of course, we have some rules, some guidelines how we can send digital evidences, but we never analyze the risks because when the digital evidence is unloaded from the messenger, it also proceeds by some kinds of messengers. In Ukraine, we have we use messengers with low level of security and safety also. For example, Viber, and to be honest, I have a lot of questions to Telegram. And also we have lack in standard for online protection of devices, our smartphones, computers and tablets, on which digital evidence is proceed. Likewise, we didn't have standards and for protection digital evidences itself from data modification or data leakage. Of course, we have some kind of applications. It's good, but not all people can use some special application for this. And last but not least, it's area about privacy. In Ukraine, there are cases of interference Russia Federation in private life of human rights defenders who were involved in documenting war crimes. When my colleagues and I were conducting digital audits for NGOs, and we found additional active sessions from Russia in their Telegram accounts. This happened in two cases, of course. First of all, it's after accounts were hacked due to lack of multi-factor authentication. And in another case, it's really interesting because people who went through filtering camps to leave their temporary occupied Ukrainian territories, they gave to Russia soldiers for checking smartphones and in other gadgets, and they connecting to certain messengers of Ukraine to read their correspondence, all messengers, and the information which they transmit via messengers with colleagues, with friends. So we see we saw active sessions from different messengers from territory of Russia Federation. And of course, you will talk about also privacy. We must take care of ensuring the right to respect for private life of the victims of Russia aggression. It's also about on civil society and civil servants, and also from government side. Of course, the Ministry of Digital Transformation and non-profit organization work with different social campaigns, and we also working on online platform. It's DIA Online Safety Platform, where people can read a lot of information about online safety risks during also the war for different kind of people, but we're just working on this. I hope that this year we will have public presentation and public launch of this platform.
And it's already the invitation, right?
Yes.
I think it's just a good place to stop.
Yes, and I really want to say thank you, and we really need to unite for work for more protect our online safety environment, and work united for online safety and for data protection. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, Анастасія. Я думаю, що
Anastasia, thank you so much. It's very important to say that there is an understanding of the major risks in the informational field to do with documenting war crimes, and there are no universal solutions, and we should be fully aware of the dangers lurking out there in the informational space. During the previous cooperation, the word cooperation rang loud, and the presence on this panel here is indicative of the diversity of the organizations, of the people representing very different and diverse institutions. We have a representative of the Ministry of Interior. This is a public institution. This is Katerina Pavlichenko. I'm incredibly grateful to her for joining us here on this panel to discuss the role of the civic society, to discuss cooperation, and there is a category of offenses where the Ministry of Interior has a very active role to play, where certain mechanisms for cooperation are being elaborated and put in place. So I would like to ask Katerina about the value of cooperation, the role they assign to civic society, and the prospects. You're welcome. Thank you, Romane. Thanks, everyone. I'll try to be brief. I'll try to be down to the point. I know we are all tired. It's been a very active event today. We had a number of very interesting discussions. As Roman was saying, we can see great diversity and richness of civil society organizations working closely with the governmental institutions, and on behalf of the state institution, I would like to thank you for your contribution to documenting war crimes following the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation. A lot has been said about striving for synergy and strengthening cooperation. We have seen incredible synergy and outstanding support, hand-to-hand cooperation, and I feel that this cooperation needs to be maintained for the future. Let me now address the question of war crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine. So much has been said, and I don't think I need to go into numbers. I don't need to go into the whole arsenals of killings, the summer executions, the crimes committed against children, crimes committed against the freedom of the press and the journalists. But I wanted to underscore the importance that civil society organizations play in documenting these crimes and in the support we get in both documenting and outreach to the people. I would like to consider the 2 points together as they're inextricably linked. Considering that the units of the national police, the police officers, are often the first to be on the scene of the hit of the enemy missile or enemy shell, they're first to enter the deoccupied territories to document the atrocities committed there. Indeed, there are many crimes investigated and documented with your support, owing with your interventions, owing to your active cooperation with the law enforcement, with the police, with the General Prosecutor's Office. Equally, we know that a lot of information is at the hands of the civil society organizations. As we've just seen, we have such a rich fabric of civil society organizations. Some operating the hotlines, others are supporting the victims. Yet others are rallying and fundraising and delivering help. As representatives of the civil society, you have the information within your disposal that we need as law enforcement agents. So even though police are the first to be on the ground once the territories are liberated, you are the holders of the information. So given this opportunity, I'm trying to reach out to you to urge to continue our close cooperation so that you could continue sharing the materials, the evidence you have collected. And this cooperation will put us in a good position to achieve accountability and justice, which has been the core goal of this event. The law enforcement agencies have criminal proceedings that we have initiated based on the publications in the mass media outlets. They are properly investigated. And again, it's very important to be able to reach out to those who have published information in the mass media in the first place. So a dialogue has to be established between the investigating agencies and the mass media. Before this event, I went over the criminal cases that we are investigating currently at the National Police. And let me tell you that the case files, as of now, are very solid, and they provide good leads. Following the deoccupation, the law enforcement agencies received the data about the torture cells and detention facilities. These sites were identified, and the contacts of the victims were provided to us. And this is just one example of our collaboration, and there are so many more of them. And yet another point I would like to raise in this short intervention is the mass media outlets and people publishing the information. It's very important to ensure that the information is useful and does not blame the victim, nor does it re-victimize them. There's always room for constructive criticism, both for the governmental institutions, as long as it stays constructive, and we need to consider the best channels to relay the criticism, as the enemy might use it otherwise to destabilize the situation. And the only reflection I would like to share about the issues discussed, the capacities, the equipment, Here we are receiving support from the civil society organizations, as a lot of the territories that have been liberated have been heavily mined, and humanitarian demining is in progress. And here we are enjoying the support from the civil society in ways of strengthening the capacity of the national police units in investigating the war crimes and providing equipment for the forensic examinations that then are laid to investigate the crimes. Thank you, Katerina, so much. We can discuss the prospects of cooperation and the value of cooperation from a number of facets. We have the representative of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, Olga Reshetino. They have the rich experience of cooperation between the lawyers, the journalists, the state institution representatives, resulting in the initiation of cases, resulting in inquest following the interactions. So it would be worthwhile talking about the value of such cooperation and also about the particular deliverables. So let's hear more from Olga. Thank you, Roman. Thank you all for staying with us in this late hour. You're doing the right thing. As you can see, the civil society in Ukraine is a driver of a lot of processes. Have no doubt there. To address the key question of this panel, whether there's cooperation between the civil society, the state institutions and international institutions, I would say that this cooperation is in place and it is very close. My iPhone reminded me that on the 4th of March last year, we met Alexei Bunyak, who leads the Department for Criminal Policy of the Office of the General Prosecutor, being evacuated. We didn't know then where the Kyiv would stand, but we knew that we have to continue working together, and this would guarantee the continuation of the Ukrainian state, and justice and is an important pillar of the Ukrainian state. So we developed an entire project. Then the process of the General Prosecutor was launching a site, warcrimes.gov.ua, which let people file applications regardless where they were, whether they were abroad or in occupation. And this project received support from the Anti-Corruption Initiative of the European Union, which too very quickly came around and realized that at that time, on the 4th of March, they needed to support the documenting and the operation of the civil society organization in their interaction with the law enforcement. And this is the initiative that needed the funding support. This is the flexibility that we've taught ourselves in the 9 years of war, because the 24th of February did not come out of the blue for us. It helped us stand, it helped us continue working despite the challenges. Surely not everything is smooth sailing. We always have an ongoing dialogue with our law enforcement agencies and the international community too, because the discussion is something worth continuing. Until the 24th of February last year, the international community could not decide whether there was an international armed conflict in Donbass. I remember perfectly a discussion we had in early February last year, when one highly esteemed international organization would tell us that we can't find the evidence of effective control of the Russian Federation in Donbass. So we don't know. It might be an internal conflict. The same was said by the international courts. And this is when we, as a media initiative, we've used a variety of tools to investigate and collect evidence, both journalist investigations. Amongst others, we started drafting a report. I have it, a copy of it. It's called Quasi-Legal Systems in the Occupied Territories of Ukraine. We started the initiative in order to prove the effective control of the Russian Federation. And this was done before the full-scale invasion. Hopefully now few doubts remain. Then we had to investigate that the Russian citizens were appointed to the key positions in the so-called LNR and DNR, the proxy republics, and the key conclusions we made that the Russians, in order to establish their occupational regimes, are using terror against the civilian population. They use forced disappearances, torture, summer executions of the civilian to break the resistance and to establish their rule. And this helped us predict what's going to happen in the newly occupied territories. The scale of terror overwhelmed us as everyone else, and this is helping us now document and collect evidence for the crimes. But this brings us to a different kind of problems. How do the investigative and prosecutorial agencies can put the evidence collected by the civil society constitution to use for adjudicating cases? There are certain gaps in our legislation, so to use a video or journalist article as evidence, a lot of procedures need to be followed, and rarely it would be deemed as admissible evidence in court. Moreover, we keep repeating that Ukrainian legislation, in particular the criminal code, has not been fully aligned with international criminal law, and this is something that the Ukrainian civil society has been calling for since 2014. We, as representatives of the 5 AM Coalition and other civil society organizations, keep saying that we are hopeful of the ratification of the Rome Statute, which hasn't happened yet, and in this connection, a lot of problems entail out of this lack of certainty. There are cases that we monitor, again, going to the beginning of the conflict, which were presented for court review before the 24th of February. Most of them were initiated based on our national legislation. There are thousands of cases in the Ukrainians for the creation of a terrorist organization charge, or on the charge of illegal armed formation, which do not call for an international dimension. The first article under 438, the violation of customs and laws of war, only happened in 2019. There's a major problem with the public attention to the problem, because Ukrainian courts are quite different from the courts in Hollywood movies. It's always a lengthy and torturous process, which is difficult for the media and civil society to follow. Therefore, what we are trying to do is draw the attention of the Ukrainian society to these trials, and that's difficult in doing. It's difficult, especially if these are in absentia processes. It's hard to keep the attention of the Ukrainian society on them, but we try to follow them through, because the right observation of the right to truth is important, and the history of Ukraine is written in the Ukrainian courts. Following this conference, I would like to say that the global and international law history is being drawn now at events like this one.
Thank you so much, Ms. Olga. It is, of course, very important to speak about the fact that the cooperation is definitely developing today, but there are quite important horizons, especially from the viewpoint of the civil society, that are still ahead of us, especially talking about the ratification process of the Rome Statute, which has been a demand of the Ukrainian civil society for quite a while, and quite unfortunately, this endeavor is still not finished and is still not taken by the cooperation process. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Roman Avraменko, that is representative of the organization Truth Hounds. They're working on documenting war crimes, not even from last year, but much longer than that. And their experience of cooperation, in my personal opinion, is definitely very interesting. and definitely draws attention to it. Therefore, I would like to ask Roman to share the documentation of which types of crimes they have been working on and what they have been able to achieve so far, and what type of values they see in that.
I guess, dear ladies and gentlemen, both Katerina and Olha has said a lot about the cooperation between Ukrainian civil society and the national law enforcement and prosecutorial organs. So I will take you through the story of the relationship between the Ukrainian civil society and law enforcement. Therefore, I wouldn't be able to avoid taking you back to the events 9 years back. A country can be prepared to a war by building its military forces, training troops, building weapons, but no country ever prepared to investigate all war crimes that unfortunately are being followed the sequence of the hostilities. And neither was Ukraine back in 2014. It was lacking specialists, and the documentation were done sporadically. And that was where Ukrainian civil society stepped in. We started to travel to the conflict-affected areas with purpose to document international crimes, waiting where the state authorities were getting themselves into this process, overcoming the inertia of big state machine. And these efforts later paid back. Many findings were then included into and were the basis of many of the investigations that were run after. Gradually, Ukrainian prosecutors working in then affected regions of Ukraine developed their ability to fully and effectively document incidents of the alleged war crimes. I remember that in 2019-21, we observed that fewer and fewer areas were left for the civil society in terms of documentation in Donetsk and Luhansk region. And of course, there were still areas for capacity building to match Ukrainian criminal code with the international criminal law, and we were doing this. And 1 year ago, we were put back into the situation when prosecutors and investigators of the newly affected regions were unprepared to effectively investigate and prosecute and assess international crimes. Of course, they were in a better situation than their colleagues 8 years ago, because they had a war crime department well functioning at their backs. There were practices developed, but they weren't in a better situation in terms of number of criminal offenses to deal with. And that was again a time for the civil society to step in, and we did so. Now the partnership are in a full swing, I would say, and we work in 3 main directions. One is still field work. Civil society representatives, including our NGO, collect the testimonies, produce media while being on alleged crime scenes, and sharing this information of the sources of evidence with the relevant regional authorities. And also our documenters become themselves the source of evidence. In many cases, we are involved as witnesses for the investigations. And we also share this raw data through the electronic database, through the shared access for all the relevant actors. And I would emphasize here that we, while doing this field work, while documenting, we mostly focus on filling the gaps into the documentation in order not to duplicate the efforts that already has been doing by legal authorities. In this process, we also flag the presence of evidence on the ground, for instance, for police officers to come and collect and to include them to the criminal proceedings. Second area is we're still helping with the investigations by sharing the results of our own investigations running by our analysts, and we also answer the many requests coming from the regional prosecutors to help them push through push further the investigation process. And also we offering the case building capacities of the newly developed electronic instruments in order for the prosecutors not to do everything in paper, because the working places of many prosecutors are literally piled up with the dozens and hundreds of folders full of papers. And also we continue building capacity of local prosecutors for the cases to be better documented, better investigated, and legally assessed. Despite all these good things I'm talking about, number of cases are still overwhelming, and Ukraine won't be able to investigate all the crimes on its own. And I was really glad to hear yesterday the words of the Madam Ambassador Beth Manchak, who told that in US will be sending more specialists on the ground to the crime scenes to help Ukrainian prosecutors to do better with the investigations. And also she said that the US amended the legislation that allow the US to investigate international crimes and eliminate the borders that were put by the legislation. And I want to make a call to other countries to do the same in a larger scale. In that case, we as a global society will be prepared to react for the war crimes committed during the atrocities.
Oh, thank you very much, Roman. That's really very important to think about the developments and how we can use all the data the organizations are collecting and what sort of legal strategies we can think about. But we will actually talk about that just a bit later. A part of the mobilization among the Ukrainian civil society organizations, the same phenomenon has been actually widespread among many international groups. And one of the initiative which appeared is the Reckoning Project, which is presented here by Janine Di Giovanni. So like, it'd be really interesting to hear from you, Janine, actually why you decided to step in, what sort of motivation, what sort of partnerships you managed to build, and what sort of expectations we all could have from all the cooperative methods and the ideas which are overwhelming now. Please.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Okay. First of all, I'm so humbled to be here with all of you, my friends and colleagues, and I'm so proud of the work that all of us are doing. Over the past year, it's been absolutely heartbreaking, but at the same time, the work that's been done is really extraordinary. The Reckoning Project, we're very new. We're only a year old, but we were born out of many years of experience. My co-founder, Natalia Gomenyuk, who many of you know is one of the best-known Ukrainian journalists with years working in the field. I come to you after 30 years, which shows you how old I am, of investigating wars, 19 wars, including 3 genocides, unfortunately, Srebrenica, Rwanda, the Yazidi slaughter, and 3 Putin wars. I was in the Second Chechen War when Grozny fell to Russian forces. I was in Syria for many, many years, and now Ukraine. So one of the things that I do is I tend to look at patterns of how Putin, what he does in terms of civilian destruction. But Roman asked me to talk about coordination, and we are part of the 5 a.m. coalition. There is one thing I know from my many, many years of investigating wars, and that is that perpetrators despise unity. They thrive on chaos. They thrive on disruption. Putin is a master disruptor. He doesn't want us to be unified. He doesn't want coalitions. He wants us to fight and compete, but we're not doing that. the fight against impunity, which is basically, personally, my life's mission, because the horrible wars of the 1990s, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, Kosovo, impunity was massive. And we are not going to let that happen in Ukraine. We're going to learn from our bad mistakes and the lessons that we didn't do and we did in those past wars. We're going to get this right. And one of those things is that we must be united. We must have a coalition. We can't do this work alone. The Reckoning Project can't do it alone. Truth Hounds can't do it alone. Civil Liberties can't do it alone. We need each other. We have different resources. We document war crimes, but we need verification. We need data specialists. We need people that use victim support. We need environmental people. We need all of you. We need each other. The more we collaborate, the more we have this collaborative approach, the better we're going to be. Collaboration scares off perpetrators. It really terrifies us. Them. They want us to be divided. Again, they want us to compete. They want to destroy alliances. So the Reckoning Project is gathering witness statements. That's part of our mission. The other part of our mission is to fight in the court of public opinion by keeping Ukraine alive. So we publish media stories. We had the cover of Time magazine last week. We're in Foreign Affairs. But we're also going for the Global South, because the Global South is a problem. We need to get them on our side. So right now we're really working towards Africa, the Philippines, India, places which Putin has a foothold. So that's another part of our job. But the Reckoning Project is a tiny, tiny part of the chain. The rest of you, all of us, are part of that bigger chain. The lawyers, the prosecutors, the judges that are all here, the heads of state. The chain goes on, and we're all a part of that. I just want to make one more point, because I know all of you are tired, and you've been here, and you've been very, very graciously listening to all of us, so thank you. Narrative requires collective responsibility. So what do I mean by that? I mean that personally and very painfully, I am seeing the history of what happened in Bosnia and Rwanda rewritten by revisionist historians. And sometimes I hear what they say and I listen to them and I can't believe that I was there and I saw the same thing. By the way, it is Vladimir Putin who is now meddling in Bosnia, in the Republika Srpska, to bring about another conflict. So part of the Reckoning Project's responsibility is to keep that narrative the truth. To work, preserve, and protect the narrative is again a fight against impunity. History cannot be rewritten, and we are all responsible for that. So finally, and I'm going to end now, collaboration doesn't mean we're going to lose our identity. Truth Hounds will always be Truth Hounds. The Reckoning Project will always be the Reckoning Project. We will keep who we are and our identity. We're not going to mold into each other. We're going to get better with each other. Putin, I think, thrives by this overwhelming amount of work that we have on the ground, right? But we have so much to do. We can't do it alone. Whenever people say to me, oh, there's so many of you and you're all documenting war crimes, I say, there is so much to be done. Thank heavens that there are so many of us and so many dedicated people in civil society. So let's keep going. Let's work together. Let's keep in touch with each other. We can't do everything. We're not thematic experts or demographic experts. Maybe we can even get together and regionally break things up. Putin is terrified of the work that we're doing. Our efforts have to be aligned. We can't have real impact unless we do this. So we're all here in this room, every single one of us, to end this terrible curse of impunity. Let's go for it. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Janine. Very inspiring messages we've heard. Ну і на завершення нашої розмови.
And to draw the conclusion of our conversation, I think it would be very important to hear from our panel speakers, what road ahead do we see? Considering what is happening today, it is clear to everyone that justice is a long-term goal, but we have to see it as a process and as a path. So what is the legal framework? What are the legal strategies being selected by different organizations today? What can we do with data, with witness statements, with testaments? Besides those situational cooperation mechanisms that currently exist, that are being developed, what other way do we have ahead? And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Darina Pidhirna, that represents the Regional Center for the Human Rights. Could you share the vision of your organization? You have been working with law and legal issues in many areas. So what can we do with this data? How can we help? What are the prospects for the legal professionals, please?
And thank you for the word given to me. Obviously, our organization, the Regional Center for Human Rights, we're working in different jurisdictions. We applying submissions to the ICC for about already 9 years. We are working with European Court for Human Rights, with different commissions and different institutions inside the Organization of United Nations. We're submitting application to every possible body on international level that we could protect the victims' rights, violated international law to restore all these things that was violated and was damaged during this conflict. But unfortunately, I will not repeat everything that you already heard for this day and the day previously. Obviously, it's one way is to prosecution on the level of the ICC for the top management of the Russian Federation, both military and political one. It's a creation of some kind of tribunal. It always will be dependent on the decision of the international community and Ukrainian as well. It could be the mandate of the UN organization, it could be the mandate on the level of the European community, it could be some kind of hybrid mechanism established, but in any way it will be some kind of tribunal for this also top management of the Russian Federation. Another situation that we will have, and we have already, is jurisdiction on the national level of Ukraine. Obviously, as was already said today by one of the speakers, 99% of the cases will be in the National Court of Ukraine decided. We see it as a big problem and also the opportunity for Ukrainian legal system to evolve and re-architect in something new, in something more efficient to combat these all crimes of international law in international law. We will have kind of two types of crimes in our national legislation system. First one is super minor, when we could judge some ordinary soldier or some, I don't know, like Russian who committed a crime on the basic level. It could be the case of Shishmarin, which is already closed and decided in the court of Ukraine. But also, we will have the problem, and here's the biggest one gap we have in national legislation, with the cases which could not be submitted to the international legislation and quasi-legislative bodies, but it will be decided on the national level. It's the cases of the senior management of the Russian Federation on military and political one. But also from my side, I will add the case that will be decided, the cases, for example, against some scientist who destroys the Ukrainian culture in Crimea, or there will be some, I don't know, collaborationists, some occupiers that came and destroyed the Ukrainian educational system in the occupied territories. It could be those cases because they also responsible for these crimes, but they could not be submitted to the ICC, for example, or to the tribunals that will be possibly created. Here we need some help from the international community. And this is crucial because Ukrainian legislative system, Ukrainian legal system does not have this capacity of punishment these criminals, because we have in our code, criminal code, only articles concerning the war crimes and the crime of genocide. We do not have the articles on crime against humanities. We don't have the crime of aggression included. We don't have the vast majority of the crimes concreted in the articles 438, which is war crime, obviously. We have these problems, and we still have the draft law on our Verkhovna Rada that is still in the process of evolving and adoption and discussion, and we didn't know when they will be ended, so we could prosecute criminals more effective way. Now we have some kind of gaps, some kind of problems, and especially those problems evokes on these basic levels with the prosecution, with judges who don't know how to implement this international legislation on the crimes we have on the ground. They do not have the understanding and do not have this feeling on how to deal with these types of crime. And we have a lot of huge vast of crimes that's still in the prosecution level, not on the judicial one level. That is a big problem, but still we need the help of international community. And for those types of crimes which I mentioned, that is not super sufficient for the ICC or tribunal, we will need, maybe we need to create some special, I don't know, a room in the court with the involvement of international community as the experts who will be also given some expert opinion, judicial opinion on the crimes that will be discovered in this court, in this room, on these panels. And this is the way we could cooperate. Another one, since that we as a society, as a civil society, want to see as a legal strategy of legal solution of this situation is to ensure the processes in the national level will be secured and will be provided with the most level of safety for all parties of this process. I mean the judges, I mean the prosecution, I mean the victims, the witnesses, all the parties to this process need to be secured and be in safety, so we can ensure the principle of justice. We can ensure that the justice will be working in the most sufficient and the most effective way. And the last, but very, very important thing that I want to add and to mention is the processes that will be going after the prosecution in the courts. It's the processes of reparations and remunerations to the victims of the crimes, which is also should be evolved right now and described by the international community and by the national Ukrainian community, and to provide for victims so they can be sure that not only the criminal will be punished, but they also will gain the right that was violated back. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Великий список можливих ідей щодо розвитку і національного.
Thank you. You have provided a lot of important ideas about development of the international system of justice, and the civil society definitely has plenty of ideas how it's possible to move the system forward. Now I would like to give the floor to more participants who will deal with the same issues, the legal strategies, the potential mechanisms that can be used. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dmytro Gladkov. Mr. Gladkov, try to be brief, a couple of minutes, and also Dmytro Koval, who represents the Truth House organization, and I kindly ask you to come here. I give you the mic, and after Dmytro, we finish this block, and probably if we have some questions from the audience, we can stay here for some 5 or 10 minutes in order to communicate with our audience. So, Mr. Gladkov, please. This is the time of challenges and time for us to rethink certain aspects that we have achieved regarding the architecture of global safety after the Second World War. Coming back to available technologies that should be implemented into the system of justice, I would like to say that on the basis of these opportunities, we should build new legal architecture, both safety and judicial architecture. It will enable us to prevent similar things, similar wars and disasters in future. And please, Dmytro, you may take any mic, you may take mic.
So I keep recalling what Ivan Horodinsky said a bit earlier, that he wished to change places with Prime Minister to speak first during the panel. You can imagine my situation, how badly I want to change with Prime Minister, not to be the last obstacle between you and the dinner. But anyway, I want to give maybe a few reflections on what has been said and speak about really legal work that has to be done by the non-governmental organizations like Truth Hounds. So first of all, let me say that Truth Hounds, as well as many other organizations, we started to work with war crimes much earlier than most of the prosecutors and investigators who faced the issue of war crimes only in 2022. Just because originally war crimes concentrated mostly in Lugansk and Donetsk regions and also Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So only prosecutors dealing with crimes that were committed in those regions had some experience and some exposure to the ideas of international humanitarian law and international law in general. But now prosecutors from all the regions of Ukraine and investigators from all the regions of Ukraine have to apply international humanitarian law and have to document, properly investigate, evaluate, process the evidence of alleged international crimes. So I think that the task of non-governmental organizations now is to actually share the experience that piled up in those organizations during the first 8 years of this armed conflict, of this war, and actually share this experience with those who need it, with the Ukrainian law enforcement agencies and prosecutors. Then next thing that non-governmental organization can do is actually to bring cases to other jurisdictions that also interested and have legal paths, legal ways to investigate and to deal with international crimes. This is important not only because we are kind of closing the gap in responsibility, in accountability, but also because we are telling the story, as Olga mentioned, we are telling the story through the judgments, through the court proceedings to the societies that maybe lack knowledge about some of the aspects of Ukrainian war. And I think this storytelling potential of courts should not be overseen, and it's really important aspect of the work of non-governmental organizations. And last point of mine would be that the crimes, the episodes that we see now in Ukraine, they may be classified, of course, as war crimes. Most of them will be. But apart from that, there are other international crimes, and many of the panelists, of these panelists and panelists through the whole day, they touch upon other crimes that may be legal frameworks for classifying the events that were happening, that we were observing in Ukraine. Crimes against humanity in one of the options. I can't omit mentioning genocide, since I am one of the co-authors of this Verkhovna Rada declaration on the crime of genocide that Russian Federation committed in Ukraine. But also aggression, and I'd like to address crime of aggression combining 2 points that were made previously on the other panels. The first point actually was that crime of aggression covers the sufferings of Ukrainian soldiers who can't be recognized as victims of war crimes or crimes against humanity just because they are legal targets. But crime of aggression actually allows us to bring Ukrainian combatants to the picture and say that even those deaths, even those suffering are also addressed, and they are properly investigated in the courts. And the other argument was actually that it's it's a really, war crimes is a very comprehensive concept, and it takes much efforts to build the case on war crimes, just because not every killing of civilian is a war crime, just because not every destruction of civilian property is a war crime. So, in fact, there are many civilians whose deaths would not be also addressed in the proceedings dealing with war crimes. And again, crime of aggression is the proper classification of or proper legal framework that allows to return those civilians who suffered to the picture. And yeah, actually, that would be my last point. I want to say that I think this idea was pretty much in the air, but it was not verbalized expressly as I would like to do it. So United for Justice is not only about intergovernmental cooperation. We talked about this dimension of United for Justice for 2 days for now. But United for Justice is also about actually coalitioning of civil society and civil society cooperation with the governments of Europe, governments of Global South, and international authorities as well. So I hope that this idea of United for Justice will remind us that indeed, in cooperation, we stay strong. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, Дмитре.
Thank you very much, Dmytro. We have had a lot of panelists. We have lots of great presentations, which probably do not cover even 1% of those civil society initiatives which are implemented in Ukraine right now. And the level of mobilization of Ukrainian civil society is really impressive. And it is great pleasure that within the framework of this intergovernmental, national cooperation, we had this track of civil society where we recognize the potential of Ukrainian civil society. And with this endless list of initiatives, ideas, activities and actions, potential projects and energy involved, I think the most obvious conclusion is that Ukrainian civil society is alive, it is full of energy, it is developing, and it is playing a crucial role for the development of the Ukrainian state. And it is ensuring that the justice is not an abstract concept, but is close to victims, to those people who have suffered and who expect the justice to take place. I'm very grateful to our panelists. Do we have any comments, ideas, questions from the audience? Probably you have some remarks. I'm ready to give you the floor, but I kindly ask you to be very brief, because we actually are preventing people from joining those participants who are already in the in the dinner room. Do we have any comments or questions from the audience? We do not have any questions. I'm very grateful to the audience, to those who have stayed with us. It was a long and difficult day, but I do hope that it was very informative for all of us. And I wish you a very good dinner.
Very much for all participants who are still here. And we finally reached to the end of the second day of our conference, and maybe some kind of a prize. Dinner is waiting for you upstairs at the restaurant on the second floor. Just one reminder